It basically comes down to two questions, namely, would we see either the emergence of infrastructure-based competition in a couple of areas in Europe, or will we lose some of the competitive structures that have developed in Europe over the past 10 years, and will we succumb to re-monopolization? So these are really the two questions from an economic point of view that surround NGA regulatory issues. The main principles, arguably, are already contained in the regulatory framework that governs the liberalized sector in Europe, and these principles are obviously to allow for the most intense level of competition that is attainable, and also that can be secondly squared with providing reasonable incentives for infrastructure investments, be it either, as in the past, into copper networks, the maintenance and renewal of copper networks, or now into new infrastructure in fiber. The Commission has started a few months ago, and in fact later than the national regulators, who came together already in the form of the ERG, the European regulators group, about 18 months ago, with a first document regarding these issues. But the Commission has started only a few months ago to address these questions and to situate the issues surrounding NGA in the current policy environment, and will come out probably in the course of the summer with a first draft of an EU recommendation outlining perhaps a policy approach that can be implemented throughout the European Union. Now, why an EU recommendation, and what is an EU recommendation? This is my second preliminary remark before I go into the substance of this recommendation. A recommendation is a piece of soft law, so it's different from hard law, such as a regulation or a directive, and it's not immediately applicable in a member state. So it is not a piece of binding law as such, but it's a recommendation addressed to member states and ultimately to national regulatory authorities such as Honekamp in Portugal, of which member states and then the national institutions such as the regulators will have to take utmost account, so they can diverge from the line recommended in our recommendation, but perhaps if they decide to do so, they will give convincing reasons for their diversion. So it is an attempt really to bring about a consistent regulatory approach in the EU regarding these issues. And thereby to create legal certainty for investment. Now, I will now proceed to give you an outline of what this recommendation can contain. First of all, one of the starting points is that infrastructure-based competition as such is a good thing to have. So we are quite eager to have these investments and these upgrades of existing networks to fiber because of all the benefits that locally and economically and socially. And we also realize the quite asymmetric starting points between new entrants and incumbents. Incumbents obviously relying on existing networks and having a first mover advantage in many cases. What could a regulatory response be? On the one hand, we would like to extend perhaps the definition of Mark IV to include new elements such as ducts, existing ducts or new ducts, and also other passive physical facilities. In the regulation of access to these physical infrastructure elements, perhaps also account should be taken of the high level of risk involved in the rollout of these networks. And perhaps we will see there a difference between the existing cost-based approach to access and another approach that might favor, or that might tilt slightly further towards incentivizing these investments. We already see an analysis of markets 4 and 5 of the new recommendation relevant markets. We already see an analysis of the delivered to the Commission. As we speak, the French regulator has already notified its market analysis, connecting in the context of Fibra. And we also had a German case last year, the VDSL case, and we know that Honekamp is currently pursuing its public consultation with regard to its proposed market analysis and remedies. So there's an urgency to develop a consistent and effective approach to these questions. We realize, however, that in all likelihood, due to the divergence of technologies and economic conditions in the EU, there will probably be a patchwork of different networks and different conditions. So the recommendation will try to refrain from being overly prescriptive, but rather establish firmly a few principles that then should commonly inform national regulatory decision making. So we are not pursuing effectively a one-size-fits-all approach. The basic question is how much infrastructure competition can we get by favoring parallel rollout in certain areas, by stimulating a race to invest. We see in few areas of Paris that this is possible. We also see in other areas that perhaps based on appropriate wholesale access products such as unbundling, certain duplication can occur. The recommendation probably addresses only the medium term, so has a lifetime of 3 to 4 years. And there, the action of this race to invest will in all likelihood simply occur and be focused in urban areas. So it will be market-driven to adopt Alcatel-Lucent's classification rather than risk-driven or policy-driven. And this is really the issues we're trying to address here. So we consider, for instance, specifically, the amount of information that incumbent operators should divulge to either the public or the regulator, or indeed to their competitors, about proposed changes in their network topologies. We address the questions of higher level access. So can we get away from resale and bitstream access towards higher level access products such as RACs? We'll also look for further legal basis of intervening in the markets, for instance, with regards to in-house cabling. Clearly it's difficult to address this within the current framework. We also look at pricing of access. Should future access prices include a risk premium for certain parts of the regulated product? And furthermore, if the 3 criteria test, which is the basis for delineating ex ante from ex post policy, if the 3 criteria test cannot be applied in the area of certain products which are new, for instance, products which can only be delivered over fiber, should we not refrain from regulating access at all, at least with regards to wholesale bitstream products? So there's a lot of specific issues which perhaps at the level of principles will address in this recommendation. 2 further issues before I conclude are the geographic scope of markets and transition issues. We've seen in the past that in order to remove regulation, to deregulate, we had a tendency towards defining supranational markets rather than national markets. The question is whether this is also useful, this regulatory approach, in an MGA world, where admittedly there are very, very different scenarios. We think there is some merit for regulators to look at more granular market definitions than the national level. And second, very important is timing and transition issues, because clearly, if local loop unbundlers at the moment depend on MDF assets on the central office, any future dismantlement of these central offices to save operating costs, etc., my understanding is that the Netherlands